Good evening. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. I'm Bob Shrum, the director of the Unruh Institute. This has been an amazing semester. I can't believe that this is the last of our Tuesday night panels. Have a couple quick announcements. We'll have an all-day conference on April 26th at Town and Gown on President Trump's first 100 days. You can attend for the whole day. You can attend for individual panels. Please RSVP on the website. We are serving lunch as well. Secondly, the Environmental Student Assembly is hosting an evening with Senator Barbara Boxer on Thursday, April 13th, this Thursday, at Bovard from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. to discuss California's leadership on environmental issues. And you can RSVP on the Facebook event on our page. Tonight we're going to get a millennial perspective on President Trump's first 100 days. And let me introduce first of all, my co-moderator, Danni Wang, editor-in-chief of the Daily Trojan, who is not in Annenberg, and she's a senior and a psychology major. And then Mary Perez, who serves as vice president of the USC College Republicans. She's a senior political science major. Nathaniel Haas, who's a law student, a Huffington Post contributor, and was a columnist for the Daily Trojan for a long time. Ruzan Nakwali, who's the director of the international unit at Annenberg Media, junior and a journalism major. And Tiffany Haas, we have two Haases, although they spell it differently, who serves as president of the USC College Republicans, who's a senior and a communications major. So I'm going to start out with a kind of general question. Dan Rather, former anchor at CBS, recently said that Donald Trump has had, I'm quoting, the worst start of any president in history, unquote. CNN analyst David Gergen stated that this period of Donald Trump's presidency has been the worst 100 days we have ever seen. Are those comments from those commentators fair? How do you guys feel about Trump's first 100 days? And somebody should make the best case they can for Trump as we go down the line. Go ahead.
Sure. I don't think that these comments are necessarily fair, and I'll tell you why. I think that Trump came into the most divisive political time we've ever seen, and he had to face many obstacles and large tension domestically and internationally. And because of that, I feel that he's acquired huge problems, and he's done the best that he has for the country considering these issues. And I'll give the best case that I can, Professor Shrum, for him. And that's that the economy has had a huge boom. We've seen jobs hit, new 300,000 new jobs come, and good jobs at that. Jobs from GM, Intel, Fiat, who've made huge investments into our country because of the negotiations that Trump made. On top of that, we've seen the stock market have a huge rise and consumer confidence go up because of that. We've seen illegal border crossing come down 60%, and we've also seen exports with China rise immensely. Yes, Trump had some missteps with healthcare, and he needs to work on reforming taxes, but I think considering the obstacles he faced, like I mentioned, he's done a pretty good job, and American workers are doing well under him.
Ruzan?
All right, so if you want to look at just approval ratings purely, Trump does have a disapproval rating of about 53% right now. Compare that to Reagan's first month in office, which was actually 13%. You can kind of see that Trump, I feel like, is digging a hole in terms of where he stands. I think he's having a bit of identity crisis within, the Republican Party itself. We've got, things like the Freedom Caucus kind of, smacking down his legislation and kind of, I feel like he hasn't developed an identity that he can really fit into within Washington. And I think that's kind of reflected in the low approval rating he's got. Not only do Democrats staunchly oppose everything he does within the Republican sphere, people aren't really sure how that kind of movement that he caused in the population can be translated into Washington. So I mean, so far, I wouldn't say it's been the worst 100 days, but I think that he's kind of lost the base that he had coming into the office, and that it's getting kind of difficult for him to find exactly where he stands.
Nathaniel, are the Haases in agreement here?
Only insofar as I don't think it's been the worst 100 days. I mean, Hoover had the Great Depression about 8 months in, and William Henry Harrison died 32 days into his administration of pneumonia. So But from my perspective, it has been quite poor. I mean, you know, if you look at the signature accomplishments that he promised to have, the rollout of the Muslim ban from the 6 countries was struck down by the courts. It was, by all accounts, a disastrous rollout because they didn't consult lawyers in the Justice Department or the Office of Legal Counsel. And it sucked all the political capital out of the room when they go to repeal and replace Obamacare, which Trump voters were promised would happen quite quickly into the campaign. And then, by all accounts, that was one of the most disastrous legislative drafting periods in recent memory. You know, from the text of the bill being secret and not revealed to most members of Congress. They rushed it through committee after criticizing the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, which took almost a year into the Obama administration, and almost 30 to 60 days into the Trump administration, they were trying to vote an entire replacement. And then they pulled the bill because they didn't have the votes. And so you step away from the sort of the goals of the signature achievements, and you know, it's a White House that has already thrown out the National Security Advisor. By all accounts, he's arranged these power struggles between Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus, who don't really have clearly defined roles, but seem to have to be sitting on every meeting just to give the appearance that there's some sort of cohesive nature going on. And you know, then they're all willing to talk poorly about each other to the press to sort of illustrate this internal power dynamic that's happening. And I mean, it seems like a dysfunctional family. And so you know, I'll make the best case as well, though. I think the confirmation of Gorsuch was something Republicans wanted and they were pleased by. The fact that they got the Senate in line and got rid of the filibuster from a Republican perspective is great. I think H.R. McMaster is a smart replacement for Mike Flynn. I think his move to take Bannon off the National Security Council and Katie McFarland as well, and then to sort of circle the wagons and get the director of the CIA and the director of national intelligence back on the committee where they belong made sense from that managerial perspective. So I think other than those two things, it's an unmitigated disaster. But at least they got some things done.
Well, they have a good press secretary. Mary?
Look, I think any first 100 days for any president are going to be tough, and there always will be implicit media bias. So regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you're going to think, well, the media is being unfair to my guy. But I mean, I think what Nathaniel said was true. He did fulfill one important campaign promise, and that was to nominate and to pass now Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, which is a huge victory for Republicans, and one of the main reasons why some Republican holdouts that didn't initially want to vote for President Trump did vote for President Trump. So that's a big victory on his part. Now, I will say that there is a lot of internal struggles, though, especially with the communication of his closest advisor with Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, and his son-in-law, too, Jared Kushner. So I think that the Trump administration really needs to do a better job in putting his officials in line and really seeking the best advice from generals like H.R. McMaster, who really are policy makers and experts in the field, as opposed to having his son-in-law or his daughter make some major policy decisions for him.
I'm going to turn this over to Danni, but do any of you feel compelled to refute anyone else first? Okay.
Speaking of campaign promises, I wanted to turn this to the international sphere and Trump's role in it. President Trump ran on a promise to put America first and to de-emphasize intervention overseas. Last week, he ordered a missiles attack on a Syrian airbase. The administration officials seem divided on whether the United States' goal is to overthrow the Assad regime. Where do you think we're headed for foreign policy, especially in the Middle East and in Russia?
Roseanne, you want to start?
Yeah, so Trump, during his campaign, said that he wanted his foreign policy to be unpredictable. And I think that's happening, but I think when Congress doesn't know the hand you're about to play, I think that's a little bit too much of unpredictability. I think it is a stunning rebuke of what he said during the campaign, which is pretty much surprising everyone from the people in Assad's regime to the people out here. And I think that, he kind of did run on this America First isolationist idea that we weren't going to be the world's policeman and we weren't going to intervene with everybody's problems, with especially the Middle East, especially Syria, Iraq, Iran, all these areas that have no clear defined ending towards the ongoing wars. So I think it was kind of interesting that I think he mulled over it for about 3 days, some aides say, and then he decided on this airstrike. And on top of that, Eric Trump said today, in kind of a strange turn of events, that Ivanka's heartbrokenness over this was what inspired him to kind of take action. And I think that kind of level of, capriciousness kind of scares people. And I think it makes more of an unstable world in terms of, foreign policy. I think he really could have, tried to do this through Congress instead of just ordering it. I think that, there was reasons Obama stayed away from doing that, although he did order, drone strikes. But in general, I think this is just kind of showing that his campaign promises of unpredictability are actually panning out to be so. And I think it's scaring quite a lot of people from both sides of, the political spectrum.
And of course, today we have a big carrier fleet headed toward Korea. So we have crises on both sides of the world. Anyone else want to take this on?
Well, I think we can all collectively agree that I think regime change may be the worst possible outcome, as noted by the 2003 invasion in Iraq. And I think right now we're at a crossroads with U.S. foreign policy in our response to the global terrorist threat. And I think what we need to acknowledge is moving forward, we need to have a clear and cogent response and a strategy to our response to the Assad regime. And I think we need to work with the Assad regime and Russia to hold them accountable on what they're doing to their people. And I think also, too, with the response, we don't want a heavy military footprint in there, and I think that's what President Trump is going to have to look at within the next coming days, is what response does he want, and what does the international community want within this as well. And I think he should also seek congressional approval.
Yeah, I mean, the bizarre thing about the Syria strike is that the president, who 48 hours before it happened said and sent the message that it would be, the administration's position was that the Assad regime was fine where it was, and that this wasn't the action that everyone thought that they would take, and then took that action, has made no change in his stance. The same bodies of babies who we were so moved, we were all moved by, that inspired these strikes, would not be allowed to come to the United States as refugees under current Trump administration policy, which does not make a single bit of sense to me. And I think, from a strategic perspective, if you're going to do something like a strike on an airfield, which by most accounts was up and running, the next day and launching more airstrikes in the Civil War, you have to have a strategy behind it. And the lack of that strategy forming and being put forth to inform the airstrikes was what troubled me the most. Is regime change the position of the administration, or is it not? If Syria does it again, if there are more reports that chemical weapons get used, do you do it again? 4 times as a private citizen, Trump criticized and said that Obama should not go into Syria, and then, within 48 hours of the same chemical atrocity happening that happened when Obama was president, Trump has gone into Syria. And that's, it's fine if you make that decision as a president, but then to say that the only thing that inspired it was you were motivated by the pictures that you saw in the media is quite bizarre. And so I think that there needs to be articulated a strategy of what to do in Syria. Otherwise, I think you're absolutely right. The Trump doctrine seems to just be to not follow doctrine and to do unpredictable things. On Twitter today, he's tweeted that if China doesn't do anything about North Korea, the United States is going to do something. And that's not something that the commander-in-chief should be tweeting without sort of a broader understanding of the geopolitical implications for that. And so it remains to be seen. But as of now, I'm also quite worried about what the Trump doctrine is and how it will affect the security of the world. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll pull this back to domestic affairs. As you guys suggested, the start of Trump's presidency has come during one of the most divisive times in our political history. His health care plan was stopped in the House largely by the most conservative wing of his own party. So, Tiffany, I'll start with you. How, under these circumstances, can Trump advance his priorities, get an infrastructure bill, which, for example, would involve a lot of federal spending, or make sure the government doesn't close down, when he can't get the backing of a significant number of people in his own party?
It's going to be really important for Trump to reach across the aisle and use his negotiation skills to really garner the support of the Democrats. Historically, we've seen that Republicans have been known to be the party of no. However, currently, we're seeing a historical shift to the Democrats becoming the party of no. So what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to get an inch from the Democrats, and we're going to have to give an inch and meet somewhere in the middle for the interest of the American people. And Trump is going to have to do that by, again, using his negotiation abilities and really making sure that that happens.
Nathaniel, you think the Democrats are prepared to work with President Trump?
No, I'd entirely refute the characterization that the Democrats are the party. And no, I mean, for 8 years, the Democrats tried to put forth policies and judges and were filibustered and were rejected. And now, the first response of the Republican Party is to just get rid of the filibuster when the Democrats object to Neil Gorsuch. And the notion that the Democrats are now the party of no when the health care bill, as Bob said, was defeated because they could not get enough Republican votes to pass it out of the House where they have a majority. So I don't see any evidence that the Democrats are the party of no, but and I also don't see any evidence the Democrats are going to be willing to help on health care. It's the signature legislative accomplishment of the Obama administration. Besides that, it's now polling at 55% approval rating in the country, which is not the kind of law that either party, I think, would like to repeal in any meaningful capacity if they're concerned about the midterm elections, let alone the well-being of the 18 million or so folks that the CBO says would lose their insurance if you repeal the individual mandate. So no, I think the only direction the Democrats will go on health care is further left, but that'll only happen under a Democrat president. So
No, but can Democrats, there's a lot of anger at the grassroots level. People saying resist, resist, resist. What if Trump came up with a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that was real, that leveraged some private money, used public money, invested in mass transit and railroads as well as highways? Do you think Democrats could cooperate with him, or would they have the same problem Republicans did at the beginning of the Obama administration, which is you cooperate with him, you get primaried?
So I'd say Democrats, in terms of, for example, like his $1 trillion infrastructure bill, I think in terms of something like that, yes, Democrats may be skeptical, but I do think they're willing to cross the aisle and kind of help out. I think the real issue would come with the deficit hawks in the Conservatives. I think a $1 trillion infrastructure bill is not something that would ever go well for the Republicans. So in terms of infrastructure, I feel that that would be decent, and I think that there will be some kind of cross-aisle collaboration, but I don't think that the kind of things he wants to pass that will reach Democrats will ever get through those kind of deficit hawks in his own party.
Mary, what's your view of that?
Well, I think that he can actually make some inroads with the Democratic Party when it comes to infrastructure. But like you said, that there is going to be a lot of setbacks when it comes to passing that, because the Freedom Caucus is not a strong proponent of that. And if anything, he should revisit the Affordable Care Act and try to work with the Freedom Caucus to discuss why they didn't support Trump care in the first place. And I think bringing up the pre-existing condition is a significant part of that as well. And I think the Affordable Care Act was one of his main campaign promises. And if he doesn't revisit that, I feel like that's already a failure in the administration itself.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the Democrats would budge on infrastructure. I think if they came up with a proposal to finance the bill that would appease Republicans, like 25 or 30-year bonds, which I think we talked about a few weeks ago, was something that was actually a serious proposal on the table, and came up with some specific infrastructure proposals, then the Democrats, I think, would be happy to go along. But the problem is, of course, the closer you get to the Democrats, the further away you get from the Freedom Caucus, and so you have to come up with a way to do that. The other possible policy area that they could come together on is tax reform. But the Democrats have said that they're not going to agree to any baseline tax reductions, and I just think that's a non-starter for Republicans. So I think infrastructure is the best chance they've got, and if they can come up with a way to fund it, then that makes sense to both parties. Then it's probably a win-win.
The president said today that he still wants to do health care first, and that if he can't, then he'll turn to tax reform, but he really wants to do health care first. Tiffany, I'll start with you. What do you think President Trump should and will do about health care now? Do you think it's smart for him to return to this issue?
Absolutely. This was one of the main pillars that he ran for in his campaign. It's something that many Republicans looked forward to changing, and it's definitely something that I believe will be revisited in the future, in the near future at that. I think, well, right now we all know that Obamacare will continue because the health care reform did not pass. But I think that we're going to start seeing that Obamacare is going to start failing and dwindling, and I think then Democrats will come to an agreement that it needs to be reformed, and I think then is when we will have reform, and that's when change will happen.
Congressional Budget Office, just said it's not going to collapse. They said that Obamacare has problems, but it's unlikely to collapse most of the exchanges. And the CBO, by the way, is run by a Republican, that most of the exchanges are likely to survive for the indefinite future. And I'm going to stay with you for a minute, Tiffany. Why would he plunge into this quagmire again? If he can get a win on tax reform, if he can get a win on infrastructure, why not do those things? Let Congress pass something saying we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare, set up a commission the way Reagan did on Social Security, have it report after the midterms, deal with it then.
Sure, I'll revisit the same thing that I said. I think that this was one of the main things that people were really, really looking forward to having been changed in the Trump administration. And I think because of that, it just can't be let up as an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it just goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, the law is popular with 55% of people, and to do it right, I think takes an enormous amount of time if you're a Republican that's looking to do this. I mean, as I said at the very beginning, the Obama administration was accused of ramming this through Congress, and they didn't vote on it until the year after President Obama had been inaugurated. And so it's an enormous task with enormous complexity, and it has enormous human complications. I mean, the draft of the law that they pulled from the floor of the House, according to the Congressional Budget Office, literally would have left 20 million, 18 million people without health insurance. I mean, and that's just like an unacceptable outcome for a major sector of the economy, even if there are reports that the premiums are getting higher. And I think to return to it makes even less sense because of how long the process is going to take. I mean, I think the Reagan Social Security example makes sense. You appoint a team of private sector academics and legislators in Congress and say draft a bill, and now we're going to move on and focus on tax reform. And yeah, I mean, it's disappointing if you're a Trump supporter that wanted the bill to get repealed and replaced, but I think a lot of Trump supporters were misled at the ease and speed at which that could happen, and the complexity of how intertwined healthcare policy is with the lives of a lot of people who have benefited from the law was just not fully grasped by the campaign. And so, I mean, I think the move is to get rid of it in the spotlight, pass the resolution, fine, and get on to infrastructure reform, which they can agree on with Democrats if they try, I think.
Mary, go ahead.
I think that maybe moving on to the tax cuts would be the best thing to address first, but we really should revisit healthcare. And I think 17% of Americans didn't even like Trump care. Republicans did not even like Trump care, and they need to address the reason why premiums are still so high. And like Nathaniel said, they need to have a coalition of doctors and medical professionals, practitioners, academics, and also to leave the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies out of this because they're the ones who are making all the money. And so I think if you did this at a gradual process instead of trying to cram it through within the first 100 days, that's one of the reasons why it failed. So I think we need to address this in a more coherent manner.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that this is also another issue that Trump is having an identity crisis in terms of where he lies within the party. I mean, the Freedom Caucus said that it was Obamacare, I think 2.0 or 0.5. It was Obamacare light, and it didn't actually make that many significant differences. They could have removed the essentials health benefits, which would have reduced the costs a lot. But at the end of the day, I think he didn't go far enough, or he didn't appeal to the Tuesday group and kind of keep a lot of the moderates that he would have otherwise, passed the bill with. So I feel that before he enters that quagmire again, I feel that he needs to reevaluate where exactly they want to go with the bill. Paul Ryan needs to evaluate where exactly they want to take that bill, if they really want to, completely decimate Obamacare, or if they still want to, leave those benefits and those kind of moderate allowance, available to people.
Yeah, I myself look at members of Congress like Rodney Frelinghuysen. There's been a Frelinghuysen in Congress, by the way, since the beginning of the Republic, basically, in New Jersey. Kind of conservative, moderate, mainstream conservative Republican, however you want to describe him. He wouldn't support the bill because he didn't want to go back home and explain why tens of thousands or more of his constituents had lost all health care. But we could beat this to death, and maybe Trump will. Danni?
Thanks. I wanted to turn now to Trump's relationship with the press. I think it's very apparent that he's at war with the media right now, and he's criticized his adversaries on Twitter and said that they were propagators of fake news, especially with when it comes to the alleged Russian meddling in the election. So I guess I'll turn to Raz first as a fellow member of the
'cause we're
student press
journalists,
course.
So,
Yeah,
Sorry, go
I'll
ahead.
ask my question. What do you think the media's responsibilities are under these circumstances, and do you think they've done their due diligence in holding Trump accountable?
So yeah, I think the first thing to emphasize is that like the media isn't a monolith, and that I feel like people refer to the mainstream media as this kind of, this large body of people. There's very different small media groups and, large media groups, and they each have their own editorial decisions in terms of covering Trump. So, I mean, to be honest, like during election season, was it responsible of CNN to have an empty podium before a Trump speech running for 10 minutes? No, I think that he was given, outsized coverage, and that probably affected the results of the election. But stepping away from that, right now I think the media has learned its lesson in terms of kind of sifting through, lies, sifting through, falsities. I think that the media has kind of found its foot, as its step, as kind of like the fifth estate and kind of a watchdog for society. So I mean, in terms of that, I think the media has learned, and it is keeping Donald Trump, accountable, and Sean Spicer accountable for what they're doing. But then again, I do believe that kind of what this is exposed is like, a rift in society and where we get our media from. And it seems that from, I check Breitbart a lot. I check, all these kind of like, I read the National Review. It seems that people are living very different realities, and the media reflects that. So the information we get from wherever we get them from, they don't tell the full story. And I think that's a serious issue that we're going to have to encounter over and over again as technology allows us to kind of get our information from different places.
And I'd just like to echo the notion that under any circumstance, the role of the media is to remain unbiased and factual and accurate at all times. Regardless of the tension they may receive, it's very, very important for them to remain accurate in what they're reporting. We saw with the story on MSNBC with Chris Coons spreading that the FBI had obtained documents of Trump communicating with Russia before he had a parcel of evidence is evidence of just that. While it's important for everyone to be held accountable, it's chiefly important for us to hold the media accountable for what they are reporting as well, because they have the ability to damage reputations beyond repair. So it's very important that we hold them accountable as well.
Nathaniel, could you comment on whether this war with the media is strengthening or weakening Trump?
Yeah, the first thing I think Donald Trump needs to learn that he hasn't learned yet is that a story about him which he does not like is not fake news. Like fake news was the story during the campaign that Hillary Clinton was helping the Comet Pizza store in Washington, D.C. with a child sex ring. Like that is categorically fake news. A story that reports on all of the intelligence agencies investigating, Russia's meddling in the election is not fake news. And so, I think a lot of the damage, nonetheless, that Trump has done with his relationship with the media is not only self-inflicted, but kind of ironic. For all the abuse that he's doled out on Twitter and elsewhere to the New York Times, Maggie Haberman and Glenn Thrush, who are the two of the most respected New York Times reporters right now, gave him an exclusive Oval Office interview. And the two things that he did in that interview were to defend Bill O'Reilly and to say that Susan Rice committed a crime with no evidence for doing so. And the New York Times reports that, and yet they're giving him a golden opportunity to, a sit-down interview in the Oval Office to do something like explain, the strategy for the Syria strike that took place. And, I think that the notion that CNN and that the New York Times and that NBC, which are pillars of journalism and do real valuable work every day, that over the last few months has been especially good and has been especially without serious journalistic failure. I mean, the notion that those outlets are fake news, which he has said on Twitter, is not only a bizarre one, but a deeply damaging one. And the last thing I'll say is I think that choosing not to attend the White House Press Correspondents Association dinner, for all its ritzy nerdiness, I mean, this is a dinner that literally celebrates the First Amendment, and to send the message that is something not worthy of going to, I mean, some people would say it's not worthy of going to for other reasons, but the whole narrative that the press is like out to get the Trump administration, I think is not just bizarre, but is quite damaging to the ideals and the important role that journalists play in society.
I just want to say, though, I mean, the thing is that both sides are at fault. The Trump administration is at fault and the media is at fault, because the media is going to be biased against the Trump administration regardless, with whatever he's going to do. However, at the same time, Trump needs to stop tweeting at 2 o'clock in the morning and start calling out on journalists, because A, that's unpresidential, and B, that's just unprofessional. So what both sides need to do is acknowledge that the conservatives are going to say that the liberals are doing X, Y, and Z. Liberals are going to say that conservatives are doing X, Y, and Z. And I think one important lesson that the more the liberal media keeps talking about Trump and all of his faults, it actually emboldens him and emboldens his base in the Rust Belt, where a lot of Americans felt like they were left out in the election in 2016, which is one of the main reasons why I think Trump won the election. So I think that the media needs to take a step back and realize, wait a minute, we're alienating maybe a certain population of Americans, and I think objective reporting, and I say this for conservative journalists too, because I think InfoWars is probably one of the worst sites you can go to for reporting as well, so I think both sides need to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay, I'll just jump in. So yeah, actually what you're saying is right. I think the issue isn't necessarily that they're alienating people. I think there's like a full-scale information war going on right now, and nobody really knows who's telling the truth. Like, for example, when the CIA and like the intelligence communities released a report on Russian interference in the election back in January, nothing in that report contained a shred of evidence that added to what we already had. And news outlets, CNN, New York Times, everyone reputable reported that as, smoke leading to fire. And that's the issue, is that people need to investigate what exactly is being released and where this information is coming from. Because I saw that a lot of people, kids around school, they were like, the CIA released a report today, it says that they have, they can't release their sources or methods, but, they have a strong, assumption that there's interference with the election. I think, to be honest, CNN would just throw that up there on their screen, and people nobody really investigate what that report actually contained. And if it actually had any evidence, backing up these allegations. So I feel that, the media, the intelligence community, the Trump administration, everybody's kind of lost in this kind of haze because it's difficult to find where actual information is coming from, and if it's true, and if you can verify it.
yeah, I mean, I would push back on a couple of things. I mean, I think that the first thing is that the collective narrative that the media as a whole is biased toward the Trump administration does not make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, the most watched network in America is Fox News, and we know for a fact that the President of the United States' morning ritual is to watch Fox and Friends and tweet things that he sees them reporting because they're favorable to him. And Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly are virtual lapdogs of the Trump administration. So the narrative that the entire media as a whole is biased toward Trump, I think, is not quite accurate. And I think that what's particularly weird to me is the idea that in a 48-hour period, Trump can tweet that leaks to the media, and that the use of anonymized sources to substantiate some of these claims, which most of the time are done for very good reason, because those people actually can't talk to the press, without revealing. But he tweeted that was bad when it came to the deluge of information from the CIA and the FBI, but then tweeted out a Fox story that was relying upon an anonymous source to discredit those allegations as if it was positive. And so that I wish there was more consistency in the narrative from the Trump administration, and I don't think that we find that. And I think that the speed at which he spews falsehood sometimes makes the media seem like they're antagonistic when in reality they're actually just doing their job.
I want to turn the conversation now to college campuses, because this is from a millennial perspective. And campuses throughout the nation have embraced this kind of newfound activist spirit under the Trump administration. On the day of his inauguration, including our campus, we saw a protest ignite. And so are these protests productive?
Yes, I think protesting on campus is productive, but to a certain extent. If the students that are protesting aren't actually going to go out and vote, then I think that what they're doing is just not going to be as productive as they might think it is. And let me explain. Pew Research Center found that 67% of millennials engage in political discourse online, whether that be posting or doing any kind of activism about politics online. Yet only 18 to 23% of them actually make it to the ballot box. This is a really, really big problem, and it's become a phenomenon known as slacktivism. So I think that with protesting, it really, voting has to go hand in hand with it in order for it to be very, very productive in its truest sense.
I actually completely agree. I think that's right. You know, I know a couple of people that, you know, didn't necessarily go to the polls, but I saw out, you know, marching down Los Angeles and down Figueroa, you know. So I feel like you're completely right. I think that visibility is an important thing, and a community is an important thing, is when you're like protesting for something. But I do think that needs to go hand in hand with actual, you know, voting, actual, you know, routes, official routes of, you know, making your voice heard. So I feel that, you know, you have to define what productivity means. You know, are people marching on Fig to completely oust the president? No, but they are trying to show visibility. They're trying to show that people oppose these things. And I think that's valuable in its own sense. But, you know, voting is more valuable. But in conjunction, I think they work together well.
Okay, good. Let me move back to the Supreme Court for a minute. And I guess we could start with you, Nathaniel. What happens if President Trump gets a second appointment? Does he really want to appoint someone who would, say, overturn Roe v. Wade? That's not what he ran on, really. It's not what he seems to care about. But does he have to make that kind of appointment to satisfy his own party? And what does it do in the politics of the nation in 2020?
Yeah, but I think it's slightly more complicated. But I mean, the question's a great one. I think first it depends on who you know, the appointment is to replace. You know, if Clarence Thomas announces he's going to retire from the court, whoever Trump appoints, I don't think will do much for the balance of the court in terms of, you know, whether or not they will overturn Roe versus Wade. I also think, in the Gorsuch interviews and hearings demonstrated this, it's immensely hard to nominate a judge who will openly talk about their feelings on a matter like abortion in explicit terms. And so short of finding a judge that is hyper-conservative and that is, you know, written, you know, in exhaustive detail or perhaps, you know, has made a decision on some of these abortion cases that have been swirling around with regards to, you know, laws that restrict access but don't totally, you know, try and get rid of the practice. It's immensely hard. I mean, I think it's more likely than not that the judges on that list from, you know, the guy at I think it's the Heritage Foundation from which he pulled Gorsuch are more likely to overturn Roe versus Wade. I think it will it will make his base happy. You know, overturning Roe versus Wade has been a goal of the Republican, you know, Party and the mainstream view since that decision was handed down, basically. And I think Democrats should fight like heck to prevent it, obviously, but, you know, with, you know, the filibuster gone, I don't know how practical it will be to do that. I mean, I think if anything, it just illustrates the vast import of Democrats to fight like tooth and nail to get, however hard it will be, the Senate majority back in 2018, because that is very much on the table and is at stake. And, you know, while I did try, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg's workout routine, I hope that it's working, and I hope that she remains healthy. You know, you can't hang your hat on that. Yeah.
Anyone else? I think what we should probably do, I want to ask one last question and then turn this over to the audience. We're never going to get through all the questions that we had. There's a special election in Kansas tonight, and I've not been impolite. I've just been trying to keep up with the results. It's in a very Republican congressional district that Trump won by 27%, and Mike Pompeo, who's now the director of the CIA, won by 30%. Right now, the Democrat is ahead 51-48. That is with the most Republican of the big counties, Butler County, reporting. So you've got a lot of Republican vote in there. And Harry Enton, who's one of the forecasters that I think people should pay attention to, says that Wichita, which is Sedgwick County, now has Thompson up 20%. He's the Democrat. On a uniform swing, he needs to win there by 9 to win the district. And you have the Republican Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, has just come out and said, and this for me is an amazing indication that the Republicans are very worried, regardless of what the result is, I don't think you take it either way as a ringing endorsement or an indictment of Trump. What's the reaction going to be if this very, very Republican district suddenly elects a Democrat in a special election, and we have another one coming in Georgia next week? And what does that maybe tell us about the midterms, although we're still a long way away? Tiffany, you want to start?
A predictable pattern has happened throughout the last decades with presidential races and these midterms elections, and that is that typically the party of the president does not win in midterm elections. And that's mainly because of one phenomenon. It's that typically the people that are the most politically active are going to come out for those midterm elections, because during the general elections, about 60% come out, but during these midterm elections, about 30 to 40% are going to come out. And this 30 to 40% are going to be the most politically active. And in this case, people that might be upset with the Trump administration, they might be the politically active ones that come out. But I would also argue that with Trump, a new phenomenon has been created, and a craze for, and an excitement, a refreshment of the Republican Party has started. And his base is very, very loyal. And I think that it could go one of both ways, and I think that in this case, it might turn towards the Republicans, and that the base might come out and show up, but we'll see.
What's it mean if they lose the special elections? Is it just to be expected in such a Republican district? Well, I don't. Do you have an opinion or not?
Yeah, no, I think it's. I mean, it's a horrible harbinger if you're the Trump administration, and I think that I think that Chris Kobach would probably be saying, if this election were going the other way, that it's a ringing endorsement of the Trump administration policies, but it's not. And yeah, it is true that the midterm after the presidential election is super damaging for the current White House holders party. But I think the Republicans have to come to grips with being the party of no for 8 years, and then that is very different than trying to govern when you have majorities in both houses of Congress and you have the presidency. And I said at the beginning, and I really believe it's true, I mean, 80-some days in, I think they have failed so far that test. And I don't know how loyal the Trump base is, because these are people that voted by all accounts in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, at least, in quite overwhelming numbers for President Obama in 2008 and 2012. And they heard a message from Trump that they believed, and they changed their votes accordingly. But I don't know if what they heard and what they expected to happen are going to happen. And it seems that as of now that those promises have not happened. I mean, the closest they've got to what they were promised is maybe some rhetoric about coal jobs and we're going to pull out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I just don't think that does it for a voter in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin and Michigan. And if it's not doing it for super far-right voters in Kansas, I mean, that's, those folks aren't the mainstream of the Republican Party. These are the farthest right of the farthest right. And I mean, when was the last time that district was blue?
1994. But it's been redistricted since to make it even redder.
Well, I think I'm the bearer of bad news for my party, but I think 2018 for the midterms is going to be very tough for Republicans. I mean, we've already seen the DCCC already deploy staffers out into Orange County seats, where Orange County is a predominantly red county. I know several members there are actually very worried that their seats will be overtaken by Dems. So I think this actually could even lead to an argument that maybe there's some political indifference. Maybe people are tired of both parties. Maybe people are frustrated with the Democrats and the Republicans and want to actually seek party apolitical. Maybe they want to become apolitical, or they're just indifferent. They maybe might pursue a libertarian candidate. But like Tiffany said, though, this is a very common trend, and Democrats will have a leg up in the midterm election. So I'm really not surprised by this.
Well, if I could editorialize for 1 second, what's surprising about this, whether the Democrat wins or loses, is that it could be so close in such a deep, deep, deep red district. And if the Democrat wins, that will be a very big story tomorrow. And then if a Democrat wins in Georgia, in Newt Gingrich's old seat next Tuesday, that would magnify and multiply the story. Okay, we're going to turn this over to the audience. So anybody has a question, raise your hand, and someone will bring a mic over, say who you are, and ask your question. I'm sorry, I just can't see. The lights are so bright.
Thank you. Hey, thanks everybody for being up here, and you guys have done a really great panel so far. So I just wanted to know, so there's I've heard analyses of the 2018 incoming midterm elections that say that Democrats are actually going to have a lot harder time no matter how badly Trump does and no matter how badly the Ryan Congress does, just because it's a lot of Democrats who are having their incumbent seats challenged in red states. I'm not saying I have a side on that, but I just want to know, do you think it's really going to be as revolutionary as it has been suggested on here?
Well, I actually don't think I think Democrats need to stay on their toes, and I don't think with the kind of vote suppression kind of tactics used by the Republicans and kind of the majority power that they have right now, I think the Democrats shouldn't think this is a done deal at all. I think that also just considering the fact that, I've totally blanked actually. Okay, go, someone else go. Just somebody else want to?
I mean, the story in the Senate's really not great. I mean, it's something like 20 of the
25
30,
Democratic seats and 8 Republican seats are up in the
Yeah,
Senate.
and I think most of the Democrat seats are states that Trump won and that Obama lost as well. So it's really not good there. But you know, if deep red districts in Kansas, are getting pitched in special elections, then I think the House is maybe, if not in play, at least close. And that's for a variety of reasons. I mean, the way the district lines were redrawn after the Republican majority swept in 2010 makes it really, really hard to flip the House Democrat without like a long process. And so I don't know if a majority there is in play. But I mean, regardless, it's just, it will be a referendum on 2 years of Trump, and that you come into power with all 3 branches. Well, I mean, 2 seats in the House and the White House with a clear mandate to lead, and I don't see how they have a better opportunity after 2018 to make policy than they had now. And I think that these first 100 days will be remembered as like a fundamental squandering of an opportunity that they might not get after 2018, especially because after those midterms, not to be the bearer of bad news, but we go back into presidential election mode. And that, I mean, if you think that we're going to get meaningful policies then, I think again. So, yeah.
Anyone else? Another question?
Hi. In the 4 days immediately after Donald Trump's election, there were citywide protests in LA and other cities across the country, largely focused on his insensitive comments and gestures towards certain disenfranchised groups in this country. Since his election, he's really done very little to make amends for those comments that he's made on the campaign trail, including, sympathizing for Bill O'Reilly after his accusations recently. I was wondering what you think he could do, if anything, to make amends for those things, and if you think he even really cares that much about that.
Mary?
Oh, okay. Well, look, Trump's Trump. That's just how he is. And whether or not he'll make amends, it's really hard to say because he's unpredictable. Yes, he should be the bigger man and apologize and do the right thing. But I don't think he very much cares at all. I know that's really kind of a disheartening thing, but politicians typically don't always care if it's not in their best interests. Yeah.
I think maybe as Bannon slowly drifts away from the nucleus of his cabinet, we might see a change in the way that he acts, just because, this kind of right, jihadist right kind of movement that Bannon has taken with him into the cabinet seems to be clashing a lot with Kushner's kind of almost, center right, policy and kind of treatment. So I feel that if it does shift within his cabinet and Bannon and kind of those, more alt-right elements do leave, I think that you could find he loses momentum in the sense that, he can just say something and it won't hurt him and it's completely Teflon. So I think it depends on who he surrounds himself by. And I think if that Kushner presence does stay so significant, I think that we may see him actually turn around and apologize to people. I'm not saying that, I don't think he particularly wants to, but I think that he might see it's more beneficial to actually just, apologize for these things, or maybe just not say them in the first place.
Next question. Over there.
Hi, this is a really simple question. Do you think Trump will face a challenger for the next presidential election, given that he is seeking to re-elect, and if someone within the Republican Party will come to challenge him?
I think number one, it depends on what happens in 2018. I think number two, it depends on what happens with the rest of the legislative agenda. But if I had to make the way too early prediction that is almost never right, I would say that John Kasich probably thinks seriously about mounting a challenge, because I think they're going to lose a lot of the voters that were responsible for the surprise victory. And I guess the third thing it also depends on is who they think the Democrats are going to put forward, because it becomes less likely that they will think about seriously fracturing the party if the Democrats, and I would think incorrectly, careen back towards the Bernie Sanders wing for the Trump challenge. But I wouldn't be surprised if Kasich is thinking seriously about it now. But I think there's so many things it depends on that it's impossible to say for sure or even with near certainty.
Does one of the Republicans up here have something to say about the idea of a fight inside the Republican Party against Donald Trump to make any sense?
Well, I certainly think that it's been an interesting 2 years with the elections. And, I think it's really hard to say. It depends on a lot of different things. And I think it's a little too early to say whether there's going to be a Republican challenger and who it's going to be. I think there's a lot of speculation, a lot of guessing. But I think it's a little too early to be able to come to that conclusion right now.
Can I just add really quick? I think that young Republicans like Marco Rubio will always be the party's golden boy, and I think that eventually, one day, I still have hope that maybe they'll still run him. But there's a lot of divisiveness in the party. I mean, you have the Freedom Caucus side, you have the establishment side, and then you have the Bannon side. And if we can't unite all that, then I really don't know what is left.
Next question.
Hello, everybody. This has been such a great panel. My question goes more to the White House administration. So this morning, Sean Spicer, press secretary of the White House, came out earlier today and said that he essentially compared the chemical weapons of Saddam in Syria to saying that Hitler never did such a thing. Of course, we know the Holocaust and whatnot. If you are not must to know the Holocaust, you know that chemical weapons were used during the killing of Jews at the time. My question is, with the media, is there such a grip for the White House's reluctantness to come out and give pure facts to the American public that the media is kind of forced in a way to find this and be the source of truth? And due to the White House's pressing back of saying fake news or alternative facts, that's put so much of a disconnect between both sides of the White House and the media.
Who wants to take that?
Yeah, so I think kind of the press is doing a good job of kind of pushing back on those alternative facts. But, at the same time, I feel like, false information has kind of been legitimized. And I think this election season showed it, that, false information from the Trump campaign, now administration, false information from the intelligence communities, or information that hadn't been backed up with sufficient evidence, is just part of kind of our vocabulary nowadays. So I think it's a larger issue beyond even just the media and Trump, and kind of, I don't want to, pin those together antagonistically, but I think the media is doing a good job in terms of kind of calling him out on those issues. But I still think, in general, we've got a huge kind of conspiratorial base within the Republicans, and even within the Democrats too. And I think that issue of kind of, lies can pass, or not even lies, just complete, fallacious content can be passed as fact nowadays. It's just an issue we have to grapple with, with new technology. So I think the media is doing a good job, but I think that even if they do say those things, and even if some media outlets do call that stuff out, I don't think it necessarily changes things in the minds of people. I think media consumers need to change their outlook and that critical thinking in terms of what they're consuming. So, it's not just up to the media to kind of spell things out for you. I think people themselves need to, individually, look at each, thing they consume and see, where did this come from? Who put this out? Because you can't really trust anything right now, honestly.
Yeah, I would say this. I think, number one, the Spicer thing is the most nonsensical thing I have heard a press secretary say. And if you haven't, read up on what he said today, trying to compare Assad to Hitler, it was totally bizarre.
But Hitler was the favorable half of that comparison.
Yeah, which is never a good space to be when you're making historical comparisons. That notwithstanding that, I think two things. One, I think that Trump's propensity to say things like President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower during the presidential campaign is self-inflicted damage, and it forces the media to create what I think is wrongly the appearance that there is actually two sides to that story. Sometimes I'll watch Don Lemon and his show where he has Jeffrey Lord, who's this big Trump supporter, and they put it to the panel was Trump right that Obama wiretapped Trump Tower? And everyone that's tuning in now is given a sense that there is actually two legitimate sides to this issue, when everyone from Republican congressmen to people that were up and down the bipartisan aisle there's no evidence for that claim. And so I think sometimes the media does a disservice by treating stories as if there is room for meaningful debate when there's not. And that's one thing that I think Trump has, to my dismay, been very good at doing, because he's able to recognize these slivers of opportunity. But yeah, I think that's the thing that we have to get rid of and combat. The idea that just because there's a salacious debate to be had does not mean that a nonsensical claim should be the subject of that debate.
Time for one more question, if someone has one. Yeah. Oh, there's Luke again. Luke, I'm surprised you have a question.
I have nothing but questions. And I have a particularly juicy question, too, and it's a very one-sided question. Is Trump going to make it through his entire first term? Or is there going to be something, is the weight of scandal going to be too much for the presidency?
Let's just go down.
Not a doubt, he definitely will. We've been seeing a lot of positive changes moving forward, going into the presidency, and a lot of great changes. And I think things are going to start going really well for him, and I think he will definitely end the term.
Knowing how unpredictable he is, I really don't know. I think if this Russia scandal has, fire behind the smoke, potentially, pretty easily, he could be impeached. But, in lieu of that, I don't think there will be anything controversial enough that we haven't seen that could possibly impeach this man. The bar has been truly lowered, so.
Yeah, the fact that we're asking the question sort of demonstrates that, the non-zero chance that it happens. I think that it's impossible to say. I would err on the side of that he makes it through the term, but there is an ongoing investigation among nearly every major intelligence agency, and today they're saying that Carter Page, who is this lawyer and foreign policy advisor for the campaign, there was a warrant obtained to further investigate his ties as a foreign agent, and there's no telling if it goes anywhere, but it's there and it's a possibility. But yeah, the other reality is, look, the House has to vote for impeachment and the Senate has to conduct the trial. And newsflash, but Republicans have the majority in both of those houses, so I don't see them becoming so dissatisfied with Trump that they decide to impeach their own president. No.
Mary?
Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are sure going to make are going to make sure that's going to happen, or else they'll have to pull him by the ears, because I really don't see, unless there was something serious and this Russia thing transpires. But again, like Nathaniel said, we have the House, we have the Senate, and I just don't see that ever happening.
I want to end with telling you that the Republican is now slightly ahead in that Kansas special election, although half of the votes yet to come are from Sedgwick County, home to Wichita, where the Democrat has a 57-41 lead. So it's going to be a long night, and I think it's going to be a big story tomorrow, no matter which way it comes out. Secondly, I want to thank the panel, Mary, Nathaniel, Razan, Tiffany. You guys did a great job. This was really one of the best panels. And I want to thank my co-moderator, Danni Wang, who did a terrific job. And we just skipped half of our questions because we had a good discussion going up here, and we wanted to open it up to you. I really want to thank this audience and the audiences that have come Tuesday after Tuesday after Tuesday, asked interesting, lively questions. I want to thank the Unruh student workers who make this work, and I want to thank the spectacular staff of the Unruh Institute. Thanks very much. If you're graduating, I hope we'll see you at least one more time on April 26th, and congratulations. And if you're not graduating, I suspect and hope that we'll see you back here next fall when we resume this series. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.